Right now in this country, we're punishing kids because of the zip code that they're born into. In the United States of America, we're punishing kids because of the zip code that they're born into. So ask yourself that very simple question: how far have we come? When you're at a conference like this, I think it's necessary that you ask yourself that very first question, because in my 33 years of great wisdom, I have come to the resolve that the answer to the question is that we've made progress, but we still have yet a ways to go. So on this journey to being intentional in our purpose, let's put this aside. Let's say we've used historical context, we've asked ourselves and answered the first question. Now let's pivot and answer the next question, which is, where do we go from here? This is the most difficult question that I have to answer in my daily life. Because every morning I wake up and I get on Twitter. And I will tell you that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., in his second best piece of writing, I think the first was a letter from the Birmingham jail, but his second best piece of writing was a small book entitled, Where Do We Go From Here? And he gave us two choices: chaos or community. I honestly think that adequately and accurately describes where we are today. We have an amazing opportunity to build community, but we can't help but to believe that we're on the brink of chaos every single day. That's why events like this and you being purposeful and intentional are so important. Let me tell you a story. There was a young man who was born at 633 Frederick Street in Denmark, South Carolina. And when he graduated from Voorhees High School, he went to Howard University. When he got to Howard University, he had only spent a year there, but he befriended a man named Stokely Carmichael. Stokely Carmichael convinced this young man to drop out of school after Stokely graduated, ironic enough. And so he did. He became a part of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, also known as SNCC. And their first mission during Freedom Summer was to go to Miami University of Ohio. I'm going to put a pin in that real quick and tell you that's why institutions like Fort Hays State University, Miami University of Ohio, South Carolina State, Kent State, all of these places of expression where young minds can come and begin to develop and flourish and push movements for social change are so important. But they started at Miami University of Ohio during Freedom Summer, where they were learning how to train to go down to Mississippi and Alabama to register voters. And so his first mission, this young man from Denmark's first mission in the civil rights movement, was to go to Philadelphia, Mississippi. Who in this room has been to Philadelphia, Mississippi? It is the size of this auditorium. And his first mission and task was to look for the bodies of three of his fellow slain civil rights workers, Goodman, Schwerner, and Cheney. During the day, they would hide in barns and sheds, and at night, they would go out and look in ditches and trenches, and ironically enough, they found these bodies behind the home of one of the local sheriff's deputies and ministers at the time, Edgar Ray Killen. That was this young man from Denmark's first indoctrination into the civil rights movement. This movement for social justice, this movement to be intentional, to push this country, to believe in what Abraham Lincoln called the better angels of our nature. And then, after becoming national field director for SNCC, he came back to South Carolina and became involved in the most deadly civil rights demonstration this country's ever seen. It was right around the epicenter of change, which I've always believed to be our institutions of higher learning. You know, this is a story that not many people know, but on February 6, 1968, the students at South Carolina State College, as it was known at the time, decided that they wanted to protest what the history books call the last vestiges of discrimination, a little whites-only bowling alley not far from the campus. And they went down and they began to clap and they began to chant and they began to sing protest hymns. And the bowling alley, it sits in a right angle just like this. And as they began to clap and chant, police began to surround the students. And as they began to chant louder, the police began to press up against the students. And the students ended up pressing up against the glass, and then the glass broke. And when the glass broke, the proverbial all hell broke loose. Police began to beat many of the students, and they beat them not with normal police batons, but with batons that were about this long. And at the end, they had these leather rawhide whips. There's a young man named James Stroman who tells a story about Emma McCain being held by two state troopers. She was a sophomore on campus at the time. She was being held by two state troopers while another one beat her. And the students that night, the night of February 6th, they had to go back to their campus and they had to heal not only their physical wounds, but their emotional wounds and mental wounds as well. And then came February 7th, 1968. Older people, I think the saying is, the tension is so thick you can cut it with a knife. But nothing happened until the fateful day of February 8th, 1968, when the students decided they were going to go protest again, but this time when the state troopers came, they got the right idea, and they went back to their campus. And imagine building a bonfire in the center of your campus. And it was a February night in the South, and so it was cool, not cold, but the bonfire was just enough to warm up your bones. And the embers from the fire illuminated the darkness. Many of the students didn't know what would happen next. They didn't know that South Carolina state troopers had lined up along the embankment in front of their beloved campus. They didn't know that they would close ranks like they did. And for 8 seconds, 1001, 1002, 1003, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, state troopers fired, not tear gas or rubber bullets, but deadly double-aught buckshots of the same bullets we used to hunt deer into the group of students. It killed 3, Henry Smith, Samuel Hammond, and Delano Middleton, and wounded another 29. A young man from Denmark was actually shot in the shoulder that night. And he went to the infirmary, and when he got to the infirmary, they told him there was nothing they could do for him there. He had to go to the hospital. When he got to the hospital, he was pointed out, and he was actually arrested. The history books now call this incident the Orangeburg Massacre. This young man from Denmark was actually charged with 5 felony counts, and in between the time of 1968 and 1972, when his trial occurred, all 8 officers who fired shots into the group of students were tried, and history does what? It repeats itself, because all 9 officers were found not guilty. This young man from Denmark was charged with 5 felony counts, looking at a maximum of 75 years. And when they went to trial, the state trooper, the lead investigator in the case, said that over the time they had misplaced all of the physical evidence. But he did remember this young man standing on top of a fire truck, not on the night of the 8th, but on the night of the 6th, lighting a Bic and saying, "Burn, baby, burn." And so the indictment was backdated from February 8th to February 6th. And he was charged, tried, and convicted of rioting, becoming the first and only one-man riot in the history of this country. He actually served a few months of his time on death row. But if you look at him today and you ask him what's the greatest sacrifice he had to make, and you see that his eyes don't pop like they once did from shedding so many tears of so many loved ones lost throughout this movement to push social change and bend the arc of this country towards justice, and you see that his shoulders don't stand as upright as they once did from carrying the burdens of so many generations, and you ask him what's the greatest sacrifice he had to make, he'll tell you that the greatest sacrifice he had to make was not being in jail or losing his freedom per se, but it was being in jail for the birth of his oldest daughter, or my big sister. Because this young man from Denmark, who grew up into this civil rights hero, is my father, Dr. Cleveland Sellers. And so when I think about the lessons that I've learned from people like Jimmy Lee Jackson and Septima Clark, or educators like Benjamin E. Mays, or I think about the lives that we lost, like Emmett Till, like the 4 little girls in Birmingham, and Martin, Malcolm, and Rosa. I understand that the answer to the question, where do we go from here, lies fundamentally in the ability for us to do something which I won't discuss much today, although it's necessary. It's the premise that I believe we have to rededicate ourselves, which will help you in your classrooms and will help you on your college campuses. But I won't delve into it much. But we have to rededicate ourselves to the proposition that we must love our neighbors even when they don't love us. But the second thing, which is even more important in discussions like today, is that we have to be very intentional in our ability to teach kids and help them understand that they can dream with their eyes open. Now, I know you didn't bring me all the way out here to give you the rhetoric of dream with your eyes open, so I need to explain to you what that means. Like, I firmly believe that you can't tell a young Hispanic kid who's a first-generation college student that he can be a doctor if he's never seen an Hispanic doctor. I don't think you can tell a young black kid from the heartbeat of the most metropolitan city in Kansas, and I don't want to call out a metropolitan city in Kansas and get it wrong, and tell him that he can be a lawyer if he's never seen a black lawyer. So in order for a kid to dream, he has to actually be able to see and touch that dream. That's why us being intentional and purposeful in our diversity truly matters. When I was 20 years old, I had just graduated from college. I came downstairs and told my parents I was going to run for the State House against somebody who was 82 years old, had been in office for 26 years. My mom said she'd vote for me, and my dad said he'd think about it. So I had a hell of a way to go, guys. I'm just telling you, I had a long way to go. I had a conversation with Cory Booker not long ago in 2014, and I was telling him that I knocked on 2,600 doors, and he was like, "What is that?" He was like, "That's nothing." I said, "Well, in South Carolina, we don't have like people who live on top of each other in these large buildings that you all refer to as like projects. We have to knock on a door and then drive a mile and knock on another door." And I said, I went to this door with the belief that no matter if you were black or white, that if you were poor, you had many of the same problems, and my job was to lift us all up and lift us all out. And anyway, on June 13, 2006, I actually won an election. But something amazing was happening in our country. I was getting phone calls from Dennis Kucinich and John Edwards and Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden and all of these people who wanted me to endorse them to be president of the United States. And so I said, okay. I narrowed my choices down to John Edwards and Barack Obama, and I'm just very thankful I made the right choice. I got a phone call from then Senator Obama, and he told me that now was the time to endorse him to be president, and I said, okay, I will. And I said, I'll do so under two conditions. The first is that you come to my district, and the second is that my mom can work on the campaign. Had a real heavy ask then, didn't I? And so later, a private number calls me, and how many college students do we have in the room? All right, I will tell you, as a college student, if a private number calls you, it's one of two people. It's either somebody very important, or it's a student loan company calling you to get their money back. And so I picked up the phone, and Senator Obama said, after I had traveled around the country, I've been to Ohio and Florida and Virginia, and he said, we want you to, I want to come to your district. I'm going to live up to my promise. I said, okay, and from a very poor rural area, didn't have any place to put him, and so I put him in the gymnasium at South Carolina State that's named after the three young men who were killed, Henry Smith, Samuel Hammond, and Delano Middleton. And I'll never forget that day. I show up, and this is the height of Obama mania. People are coming from miles around, Georgia, Tennessee, everywhere, just to touch the hem of his garment. And I walk in, and sitting down in this green room, which was the men's basketball locker room, is Kerry Washington and Chris Tucker. And so me, Kerry Washington, and Tucker are just having a conversation. Everything in politics is late, and an hour goes by, and then Senator Obama comes. Before Senator Obama comes, one of my good friends, Rick Wade, comes in and says, I'm going to run to the airport. I'll be right back. And this is like going to the Hayes Municipal Airport, right? He comes back with Usher. So it's me, Usher, Chris Tucker, and Kerry Washington waiting on Barack Obama. It sounds like a really bad joke, but it's true. And finally, Barack Obama gets there, and they say it's go time. And I very rarely get great introductions like I got this morning from your president. Usually we have what's called the voice of God, and they say, and now, welcome to the stage, you know. And so they said, and now, welcome to the stage, Representative Bakari Sellers. And I'm going out, and it's amazing. It's 10,000 people out there. It's insane. They're all around us. And I start, like just autographing babies and kissing people and doing all types of stuff. And finally, I get to the stage, and I speak briefly about Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech. We always get caught up in the rhythmic cadence of I have a dream that one day we shall, but we forget about the most important part of that speech, in which he talks about the fierce urgency of now. And I talked about the fierce urgency of now, and then I introduced Kerry Washington. Kerry spoke, and then she introduced Chris Tucker. Chris spoke, and then he introduced Usher, and then all the women start passing out. And then Usher speaks too long, and then he introduces Barack Obama. And I'll never forget what I was thinking at that moment. When Barack Obama came on stage, you had me, a kid from a community that's right outside the Corridor of Shame. The Corridor of Shame is a place in this country where kids go to school and their heating and air don't work, where their infrastructure's falling apart, where teachers push around carts because there's not enough space in the school, where you have a school-to-prison pipeline only because simply there's no opportunity. And outside of very few people, no one believed that we would be able to be much. But here I was standing on the precipice of change, not just in my community, but the precipice of change throughout the entire world. I was one ripple in what ended up becoming the 44th President of the United States. And people ask me all the time, what was I thinking? Because we took this picture, and to my left is Chris Tucker, to my right is the 44th president, to his right is Kerry Washington, and to her right is Usher Raymond. And I tell them all the time that I was thinking that although I was only about 350 yards away from where the blood of my family literally ran through the soil of my great state and where my father was shot, and although I was only 19 miles away from my home where I decided that I was going to be intentional and dream with my eyes open and try to be purposeful in changing the world around me, although I was only 350 yards away and 19 miles away, I had gone so far. And the reason that that image was very important, the reason that that journey for me was very important is not for me per se, but it was because to deconstruct and blow up many of the systems around me, which have been oppressive in nature, I had to live my life and be that example. Now, what I just said was a mouthful, and I understand that, and I want you all to understand that many of the students many of your classmates and many of the students that we are going back to our individual classrooms and teaching come from communities where they're faced now with environmental injustice and environmental oppression. Flint, Michigan, for example. They still don't have clean water. East Chicago, Indiana. Did you know that there are 100 communities in this country that have higher lead counts than that of Flint, Michigan? 80% of those are communities of color. We talk about a criminal justice system which is fundamentally broken, so you're actually looking at African American students who come to your campus who have not had a positive male role model in their life for 2 generations because one was taken out of the home at a very young age for a nonviolent drug crime and just put on ice. And then when he was allowed to come back home, was not given the opportunities to re-enter society and actually be a positive aspect or force. And then we talk about our public education system in this country, and it's like, where do we begin? The tragedy is that as I was telling you last night, Dr. Wiley, that my good friend Governor Sanford, yes, I did befriend my Republican governors, but Governor Sanford always told me that Thomas Friedman's book was his favorite, which was The World is Flat. And fundamentally, the world is flat now because when a kid graduates from school in Hayes, he's no longer just competing with the kid who graduates in Topeka or Manhattan. He's not even just competing with the kid who graduates in Denmark, South Carolina, or Atlanta, Georgia, or Charlotte, North Carolina. He's now competing with the kid who graduates in Taiwan. He's competing with the kid who graduates in London. He's competing with the kid who graduates in Singapore. Why? Because due to our interconnectivity, fundamentally the world is flat, and we are failing our kids today, from Kansas all the way over to South Carolina. And we're punishing them again because of the zip code that they're born into. And so when you think about these overlapping systems of injustice, then the best thing I can do is continue to be an example. But the best thing that you all can do is continue to be intentional and purposeful in the diversity that you're showing these individuals, because the final story I will tell you is that I don't know if any of you all know who Jacob Philadelphia is. Does anybody know who Jacob is? Raise your hand if you know who Jacob is. I think Jacob's an American hero. Jacob was 4 years old, and Jacob got an opportunity to walk into the Oval Office. He was the son of an outgoing Secret Service agent. You know, if you're a Secret Service agent, as you're leaving, as you're retiring, you get to go get your picture taken with the president. And Jacob's this little black kid, and he walked into the Oval Office, and he had on slacks and a white t-shirt. Fresh to death, right? And he sauntered up, and he got to ask the leader of the free world one question. Does anybody know what Jacob asked the president? He said, "Does your hair feel like mine?" And so for me, that was the most, I was talking to David Axelrod about this yesterday, that was the most powerful image that I had ever seen, because regardless of, and I know I'm in the heart of Kansas, regardless of how you feel about Barack Obama's politics, set that aside. But think about the reason why we're here. Think about how intentional and purposeful that image is. And so what did Barack Obama do? He had his hands in his pockets, as he always does, and he leaned over, and Jacob was able to reach up and touch his hair. And Pete Souza took this amazing picture. And so people, oftentimes, I can say this Jacob Philadelphia picture story, and people are like, I get it. And there's some people in this room who probably don't even understand why that's so symbolic. That's what this conference is about. The reason that picture is so symbolic is because now there are little brown boys and girls around the country who think they too can be Barack Obama. And so when you think about these things, when you think about the images that we are putting out, when you think about the way that we have to set examples, we have to make sure that we are intentional and purposeful in showing people that it's okay to pursue and achieve excellence. And I'll leave you with this quote before we take questions, because we have some time for questions. It's a quote by Benjamin E. Mays, who, with all due respect to every educator in the room, I think Benjamin E. Mays is the greatest educator of all time. Okay? There would be no Martin Luther King Jr. without Benjamin E. Mays. And he said, in all things that you do them so well that no man living, dead, or yet to be born can do them better. So when you go back to your campuses, understand that this is an important time. We have to have that fierce urgency of now, and it's okay to teach your students that they can be excellent, but it's also okay through our intent and our purpose to show them that they too, no matter where they come from, no matter what zip code they're from, no matter what family they're born into, can actually be a part of the change that we want to see. So with that, I'm going to take a few questions from the audience. Yes, ma'am. You have to tell me what your name is and what you want to be when you grow up.
My name is Cheryl Duffy, and I want to be an English professor. Which is good, because I've been one for a few decades. And my question is, what can a white, middle-class, rural English professor do to promote that community over chaos of which you speak?
So that's a great question, and part of the reason it's such an amazing question is because I really don't know what it feels like to be white, right? However, I can tell you that one of the most amazing things we can do is listen. You know, one of the reasons that we're having so much difficulty in our country right now is because we only seek out opinions, news, and views that reinforce our own. And so I wanted to come here and tell you my story, but then in order for this democracy thing to work, I have to be willing to listen to yours as well. You know, if you actually have a young kid who's Hispanic, Native American, Asian, African American, then I would encourage you to sit down and ask them a question like, what do you want to be when you grow up? You know, I want you to sit down and talk to him about what his experience is like at home. You know, what do you and your parents talk about? What makes you afraid? What makes you excited? Listen to his story and then maybe show him some examples of what that looks like. You know, when I was growing up, my dad used to tell me about this Nelson Mandela dude all the time. I mean, we had pictures in my household. It was Jesus, Martin Luther King, and Nelson Mandela, right? Martin Luther the King is what we called him back in the day, and Nelson Mandela. And so it was this air of making sure that you could grow up and achieve something like that. But even more importantly, we live in a culture right now of low expectation, and oftentimes we get what we expect. And so you have to have a level of expectation for this young man, which is far beyond what he may not be getting elsewhere in his community. And you'll be surprised if you tell somebody, look, I believe in you. I believe you can do more. And be purposeful and intentful in making sure that they understand that. Reinforce it. And then you know what else you can do is you can tell them you love them. I'm a big sucker for that. I just think that I'm not like a Van Jones. I think I can love all the problems in the country away. Van kind of blows me with that sometimes. I'm like, dude, Charlottesville ain't gonna be solved by love. I mean, I'm with that. But that you never know. There may be a young man who's going through a lot. And I think that if you tell them you love them, especially African American men, you'll be surprised the progress that you can make in that person's life. Sometimes you'll be surprised. Sometimes people have never even had someone outside of their mother, father tell them that. Questions? Yes, sir.
Hi, I'm John McClark, and I someday would like to run for public office. And so there's a big discussion right now within the Democratic Party about a division. It's much like the Republican Party, you know, the Bernie Sanders, Hillary Clinton thing. And you being who you are provide a new perspective to that, and I think probably one we don't hear enough. So what do you think is a good way that we can bridge this divide. We've been having very good discussions about it, but bridge this divide and maybe create a sense of unity that we once had in 2008 and 2012 with Barack Obama?
Well, that's an interesting question. I'm not interested in relitigating 2016. I tell that to Nina Turner and all my friends all the time. I hope 15, 16, 17 people run for president on the Democratic side. I want everybody who feels they can be president to run. I think that's healthy. But I will also tell you this about Democratic Party. We are not really a grassroots, bottom-up organization. Never have been. We are a cult of personality. This theory actually works, minus Jimmy Carter. So if you look at John F. Kennedy, if you look at Bill Clinton, if you look at Barack Obama, we've always had personalities that were driving these messages, that were individuals who espouse these beliefs of unification. And I think that we have a lot of good talent. Kamala Harris, Eric Garcetti, Mitch Landrieu, Chris Murphy, Sherrod Brown. The list goes on and on and on. But I think what we're going through right now is extremely healthy. It's growing pains. And so I am not coming here today to be partisan at all, but I will tell you that one of the more amazing things is that the Democratic Party is trying to figure out how to be in opposition, because we don't do that well, and the Republican Party is trying to learn how to govern. And so you're seeing that clash go forward on both sides right now. Questions? I also have while somebody's thinking of their questions, I commented on mental health briefly, and I know this is a little ancillary, but I do think it's important as we're talking about this diversity. How many professors do we have in the room? Okay. I did this once, never done it again because I broke down and cried. And I'm overly emotional, so that may just be me. I cried in Free Willy when the whale jumped over him. I cried. I'm that guy, all right? Okay. The This Is Us. Have y'all seen This Is Us? I've cried in all 5. I can't even watch it with my wife because she's like, stop crying all the time. So that may just be me. However, I was at a male conference, and it wasn't just a black male conference. It was a male conference. We had poor white folk, we had poor black folk, poor Asian folk, immigrants. We were all there together. And I had all of the administrators and chaperones and parents and everyone else in the entire room, including those young men. I'm about to break something. I had them, everybody close their eyes. And I challenge you to do this in your class because it will give you another perspective, and I guarantee it's probably something that you've never done before. And I said, I want you to only raise your hand if you've ever thought about killing yourself. 27 hands went in the air. We're talking about people who were in high school and below. I'm talking about 9, 10, 11-year-olds. And the reason that I encourage you just to even delve into that is because you'll be surprised the amount of pressures and stress that some of these systems that we were talking about, these oppressive systems that we were talking about, have bred into our students that we are hoping to change and make them a productive part of society. I mean, for me, it was a learning experience. For you, I expect it would be the same. And so then I challenged all 27 of those individuals. I actually didn't tell anybody else. I spoke to them individually afterwards, and now I have 27 new mentees and best friends. But for me, it was just an opportunity to, again, tell them that not only do I love them, but push them and help them excel and help them just have a moment where they can breathe. And so that would be my challenge to some of you all in this room today. Just something that you can try. Questions? Yes, we'll do here and then here. Yes, sir?
Derek Robinson, and I would like to be a vice president of Student Affairs. 3 to 4 African American males have a master's degree, and then the higher you go up, the percentage you go up. I just got my master's in career development here in Texas. And the pressures of constantly meeting the face and mentoring new people, you can burn out quickly. So how do you manage that?
So I don't manage it well. I got ulcers at a very young age. So I ascribe to, there's a great American poet named Christopher Wallace. We commonly refer to him as the Notorious B.I.G. he says that, we will sleep when we die. And so I have dedicated myself to hopefully one day somebody somewhere will be able to say, job well done. But I believe in words like hope and love and truth and justice and peace, and I think that they have a real meaning. They're not just not so tangible ideals. And so that keeps me going. But I am doing a better job with what is called self-care now, and making sure that I take moments to myself that are not just on an airplane, and breathe a little. But the best thing that you can do for your community as a black man is be an example. You can be an example for the world to see, which I have an amazing platform to be on CNN. Well, I forget, I don't see him, but he was asking me on my way over here, he was like, how are you on TV and you don't get frustrated? And you don't just lash out? And I say, because I refuse to let anybody make me become an angry black man. That's like a thing, right? That's like a stereotype. And so I'm like, okay, I can be articulate, and in the words of Joe Biden, a clean-cut, articulate black man, and be able to articulate an idea of what I think the future is going to be, and do it in a way where I set an example for all of those who want to be a part of this movement for change. So I don't know how to tell you to get rest along this journey, because I ain't figured that thing out yet either. But do practice self-care and always remember to dream. In the back?
Yes, I'm Atul Rai, and I'm happy being a professor. I just want to ask the following question. We have this dialogue between minority and majority, but we also see a lot of diversity within the minority group. And my second question is that we also have a lot of minorities, and so what is your take on first the diversity within the minority group, and also the inter-minority relationships?
Well, let me answer the second question first, and that is, this is an old Southern grandmother saying that you can't fall off the floor. My grandmother used to always say that to me. And the reason that's important now is because there are a bunch of groups in this country who feel as if they're going through a unique, oppressive time period. Whether or not you're disabled, whether or not you're a minority, whether or not you're a minority within a minority, whether or not you're female, everyone feels like they're on the floor, and they're on the floor together. And so what you're starting to see, which is very important, is coalition building. And what that means is that you have to have a level of empathy for your allies. So if you have a group of students on your campus who are immigrants, and you need to be out there on the front lines making sure that your college or university has a progressive plan when it comes to DACA, right? And then when you have an issue, you need to expect that they will come and be a part of your movement or journey as well. I challenge everyone to do that. I'm on the front lines of reproductive rights, right? That means when there's a young African-American kid who's murdered by an officer who's unarmed and didn't get the benefit of their humanity, then I expect to see every college-educated white woman who believes in reproductive rights the way I do to be there with me. That is the only way that you build allies, and you have a level of expectation that will allow you to join each other and push for the change that you want to see. Diversity within individual cultures is amazing, because people think that all Hispanics are alike. Like, no. Everybody's not Mexican. Like, you just can't say that. I have to tell my colleagues that on CNN sometimes. Like, that is probably one of the more ignorant things I think I've ever heard you say. That happens a lot. You'll be surprised, the diversity which is in your African culture, from the Caribbean on up, as we were talking about last night on the ride over. And so I think that we have to have a great deal of respect for the individual cultures that we have around us. We have to encourage that diversity. And if those of you who are in leadership positions on your college campus, you have to do a better job of empowering those people. You have to empower the women around you. You have to empower the black women around you. You have to empower the Hispanic women around you. You have to empower those who come from Caribbean descent, et cetera, because we need to make sure that our college campuses, don't look like country club memberships. That's a very important aspect. I can absolutely say whatever I want to say because I'm leaving after this, but y'all don't get in trouble, okay?
I'd let you know that when you were on TV and not being the angry black man and being
Thank you. Yeah, you channel that. I'm gonna do this young lady behind you, and then I'm gonna do you. Okay?
Hi, my name is Lori Hurdle, and I'm a mental health therapist. I have a son that we adopted when he was just 6 weeks old. He's Mexican American, and he has found himself, he's now 20 years old, found himself kind of in between Caucasian and Mexican American, and very confused, depressed, and I worry about the pressure on him. I don't know if you have any suggestions on how I can get him to maybe become a little bit more, I don't know, feel that he's more joined in the community at large rather than have to choose between one or the other races.
Yeah, I think the first thing that you need to do is help him find the affirmation of who he is. And what that means is that I think that oftentimes we try to assimilate in things that are not us. And it's okay for him to be a Mexican American with amazing white parents in Kansas. And I know that's going to be extremely difficult because of the lack of diversity that we oftentimes find ourselves in and the segregation that is America. I mean, we go to church together. Well, at least in the South, we got white churches and black churches. You got the white Baptist church and the black Baptist church. All right, you usually go to school in the zip code that you're in. You know, you go to the Publix that your own neighborhood goes in. And so that's very difficult. And so again, I keep going back to two words. You have to be intentional and purposeful. You have to make sure that you're doing everything necessary to give him every opportunity to see his Mexican-American heritage for what it is and give him something to be proud of. Because when you're proud of who you are, then you will wear that on your shoulders for a very long period of time. He will put that badge on in any community that he's in, and there is no reason why, as a Mexican American, he should not be proud. That also means you're going to have to protect him from some of the images that he's seeing, especially if he's in a fragile state. Because there are people who will tell him that he's a racist, or I mean, not a racist, a rapist. There are people who will chant, "Build that wall" at him. And so you're going to have to protect him from some of those images as his guardian and caretaker and mother. But other than that, you need to make sure that you're giving him things to be proud of. And I'm still figuring out how to raise a 12-year-old girl, because at 9, little girls change. I mean, their heads start going, I don't know what I'm doing. And so I don't know if I'm the most effective parent, but I can tell you that every day I make sure that she's proud to be a little black girl.
I teach science, and so I have a hard enough time convincing my students about, the truth and how to get to the truth. But I often have conversations with students who may be conservative, and we hash it out, and we are able to at least come to some common middle. And once you convince them that, some things are just outright lies and have to be, seen for what they are, how do you give that student or person ammunition or fuel to, when they do go back to their community where they are comfortable, to be able to maybe convince other people of truth of life, or maybe even to help protect that amount of truth that they now have and not be distorted or polluted?
Well, you've actually achieved something that I haven't. Every day, I'm like trying to talk to people about what is a fact and what is not. I work with people who try to convince me that an apple is a banana every single day, okay? And so you've actually made it a little bit further than I. However, what you're talking about, and the reason that this conference, again, is so important is because what you're cultivating many times in your classrooms, many times on your college campuses, are what I like to call apostles of truth. They're messengers or apostles, because they then get to go out and be the person who gives the message back to their community where they're from about whatever that truth may be. And so I tell people all the time, look, there's some conversations, who is our, didn't we have our provost speak earlier today? Was it Joe? Is it Joe? Jeff. Jeff was talking about having conversation about diversity at his country club. But we have to make sure that Jeff is prepared to go back, as I'm sure he is, to that country club where he would be a better messenger than you would be. Okay? And then there's conversations that Jeff can't have that you can in certain communities. And so I always embolden people, and I'm a big coalition builder in believing that we have to have coalitions because we have to be able to have and push messages for change and social justice throughout the entire country. I don't think that we can talk about criminal justice reform amongst a bunch of black folk. I think that we have to make sure that we are bringing people in and expanding the message, because we'll just be preaching to the choir all day long. But then you have to give people confidence, and you have to tell these young men and women that they can be the change they want to see. And I think that what we're seeing now with this new explosion of social media, this new explosion of how we're interconnected. I have a tweet right now, which is why my phone is going dead. Do you know how many likes my tweet has gotten in 36 hours? I've gotten 234,000 likes. I've gotten over 2 million impressions on one tweet, 140 characters. I won't tell you what I said because it's pretty funny and it's not profound at all. But the fact of the matter is that something has traveled all around the world, not once, but maybe 10 times, just through social media. And I have been a messenger that the world has been able to see with one tweet. I'll tell you what it is privately if anybody wants to. Yes. I said apple. Nobody uses the word ducking. Who says ducking? Go ahead. Okay.
Now my question is this. You are a political analyst.
I'm a commentator. So analysts, they talk in fact. I just give my opinion.
Now, what are your thoughts on the role of the media in promoting diversity?
I think we do a piss poor job. I tell this to people all the time. How many African Americans do you see in primetime TV, on cable or broadcast? 2. Lester Holt and Don Lemon. Both men, by the way. I think that the number of voices, I mean, how many Hispanic commentators do we have? Everybody knows Ana Navarro, because you can't help but listen to Ana Navarro. If you don't listen, she's going to yell at you, and you will hear her then. But you know, we only have Ana Navarro and Maria Cardona. You just don't see those images. How many women from the Caribbean did we have to come on and talk about what was going on in the Virgin Islands? You know, how many times did we cover the Virgin Islands? We covered Puerto Rico a whole hell of a lot. But how many times, do you know the island of St. John's doesn't have any, it's 100% without electricity? Do you know there are 3 hospitals in the U.S. Virgin Islands? One of those has actually been condemned by the Army Corps of Engineers, and the other 2 don't work. So you have 3 islands with no hospital? This morning, as of this morning, to shift, 83% of Puerto Rico was still without electricity. And have we moved the narrative? I don't know when the last time we went there. I mean, just last week, two weeks ago, we had the largest mass shooting in the history of the United States of America, but it seems like the gun debate is just kind of, we turned the page. And so we have a very important role, and I think a lot of times we drop the ball. But I also think as individual consumers, we actually do worse than the media. Because I think that we have to do a better job of seeking out what truth is. And if you're just expecting to watch Fox News, MSNBC, or CNN every single day and get your fair and balanced truth and honesty, then you're doing it wrong. I consume the BBC, I consume Al Jazeera, I consume the Atlantic, the New Yorker, just so I can actually have a well-balanced opinion on what the world looks like around us. And I think that's necessary. I read the Wall Street Journal every single day, which I believe to be probably the most conservative paper we have in our country. But it's actually some of the most well-written things we see about our communities. Read it every single day. And the reason being is because I take my responsibility as a consumer more seriously, and I also understand that sometimes the media does let us down. I really believe the media lets us down. I saw Fox and Friends. Questions? Yes, ma'am.
Our ideologies and belief systems shape our perceptions, our perceptions shape our actions. Was it the motivating and prime factor to bring about change? I'm starting with ideology, set of belief systems.
And as the end of your question, there was a perfect question to end on. Ask the end of your question again.
What do you think would be some of the prime factors to bring about change?
She asked me, what do I think would be some of the prime factors to bring about change? I honestly believe that where we are in this country is very similar to where we've been before. And I know people are like, what? I think the United States of America has been here before. Tom Brokaw wrote a book and had an amazing documentary. It was called Boom, 1968. In Boom, he talked about the fact that we had the Orangeburg Massacre, the fact we were coming off the Vietnam War, the fact that in 1968 you also had the death of the assassination, of RFK and Martin Luther King Jr., and that the country was actually at its breaking point. I think that what's going to lead to the change that we have now is that unlike sometimes we had before outside of maybe 68, that there are visceral opponents to the fundamental freedoms that we hold true. I think that there are people who want to re-image what the United States of America we believe should be. We are sitting in western Kansas at Fort Hays State University having a convention about diversity, and you invited the son of a civil rights hero from the South. That in itself speaks highly about what we believe the country should look like. And what's happening right now is that people are testing and trying our individual value systems. The most amazing part about the students that you all teach and interact with every day is that each one of the students that you talk to knows someone that's gay, has a Muslim friend, knows someone who's undocumented, has a black friend, because our generation actually is a part of the world in which we think we're growing to be. But there is a very loud, vocal antithesis to that, and the question is who is going to win that battle? But because we're at places like this that reinforce our value systems and reinforce the beliefs in what we think our country not was or is but can be, I think is very important to our journey. I really believe this is what America looks like. And I'm only 33, so I get a whole lot wrong. But I'm going to have and hold that belief for a very long period of time. And with that, on that great question, we'll end and bring you back up. Okay? Who's coming up? You?
Well, I hope you, as I did, found that inspirational in its own way. And Bakari, did I get that right that time? All right, I want to make sure I got it that way. I don't know how you feel, but when we have people who are in the light and who are on the national stage, there's something about bringing a broader perspective than if just Andy and his little world or Brett and his little world. You know what I'm trying to say? It helps us see a little broader picture, and in its way, I think it lifts us up. So we're honored that you said yes in coming to us, Bakari, and we're honored that all of you are here. When we dismiss the next sessions, all the sessions go back over to the Memorial Union, and they begin at 10 after 11, I believe. So thank you.